topic today is really something that's been close to my heart around loving people and caring for people for a long, long time. And I think you'll find it hopefully encouraging. And I want to say that right from the get-go, the topic really is in line with I think something very unique that you have here in this meeting. I don't know that in a lot of work, I work in the field of recovery and rehab and stabilization, and I had a meeting this morning that I led, and I have a meeting tomorrow morning that I lead within a place where I do that as a ministry. And but there's and so obviously in stabilization we have people that come into stabilization and they're all coming from different kinds of backgrounds and need around addiction. But as far as groups are concerned, after that, usually people don't get to be able to be in with all different people with different addictions very often. And there's, almost every other, there's like, it's amazing how things parallel politics and sports fans and everything else. There's an us and them and everything, right? And I think there's something really unique about what goes on here. And I come from quite a bit of experience of listening and watching and being in meetings, and like even having people sort of look at others with other kinds of addictions with judgment and indignation. And so the topic, there's no us and them, it's us. We're human, and we may have different things that came upon us, or we developed combination that are have caused a lot of dysfunction and created a real opportunity to be sick. So that said, I turned on a few weeks ago. I was starting my holidays and I didn't get it on a Wednesday, but I saw Dee's share. And I was like so blessed. And this, a couple weeks later, John asked me to speak. And I just wanted to say what a blessing it is to be here again. But Dee, how my wife and I just got so blessed listening to your share. And how important it is that we listen to each other, and how important it is that we take opportunities to share. And so the reflection a little bit today is around the 12th step, because there's a joy that comes from doing the service and doing the serve us. Actually, in German, serve us is a word. And I don't know how to speak German. I just looked that up. But I was looking for the word serve us. Now, in Christianity, there's a lot of us, we talk about being, serving others and all that a lot. But what a parallel we have in program. And we see that the joy that we have from actually being involved in sharing. And obviously, as we, many of you would know, when we're in live group meetings, and sometimes the service is making the coffee, setting up the chairs, and we all know that. But when I read this step over again in preparation, it said two things that jumped off the page. It says, having a spiritual awakening, key word, spiritual awakening, as a result of these steps. We tried to carry this message to addicts and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So, of course, affairs is an old word. It's not like you did something improper on your wife's unbeknownst. It's actually practically how I'm living my life. And those are our affairs. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that today. And exactly to go back to when I was listening to Dee share a couple weeks ago, I was like, I can't even like articulate all the different things that God sort of enlightened to me, gave me some spiritual awakening. And a couple days later, I reconnected with a guy that's also stays where I stay, but he lives up there, who's about 10 years older than me. And I knew that he had really come through a big transformation in his life. His name is Billy Moore. He wouldn't mind me mentioning his name. He was a guy that was completely from my childhood. He was 8 years older than me. He's my brother's friend. And from 16 or 17 years old, you know, we would have just written him off as a chronic. And he had many years. He dismantled his whole life over 30 years. He came to nothing, like as far as everything about relationship, possessions, and everything else. And not by his choice exactly, he ended up in Elliott Lake at a treatment place. And he got it. He got it. Like he got program. And he wrote a book with help of a pastor friend of mine, actually, as it turns out, called Pathway of Hope. I introduced that to John last week, Pathway of Hope. And so I'm on holidays and I'm like, first week, like I listened to Dee share, and then the next week I start reading this book and I'm like, there's so much joy that comes from listening and having your own spiritual awakenings from other people who are serving and caring and actually following out. So the reflection around the idea that, you know, why do we continue? This guy never would have ever thought there'd be a book written about him, and if it was, it would not end good. And yet, like, his last 40 pages in the book is how program and all the steps, according to him, have helped him to recover. It's a great book if you have, especially if you have parents or grandparents that are praying for, you know, kids that are involved, teenagers, whatever, any age, people at all ages that are in depthly involved with that addiction, to keep on praying. His parents never saw in their lifetime what happened. And it's an amazing book for that reason. Obviously, it's personal for me because they were my neighbors. They went to the same church when I was a kid and stuff like that. But I think it will touch your hearts. Going back to the point is that it says this in the book about traditions and steps, the blue book, the smaller one. It says, joy of living is the theme of the 12 step. Action, its key word. Giving that asks no reward. Love that has no price tag. What a spiritual awakening. What is spiritual awakening? A new state of consciousness and being is received as a free gift. So it goes on, but just that idea that this is what happens in my life after quite a few years of living in sobriety, and then coming back in 2011 to start to actually do work in recovery in the 12 steps since 2011. So what happens is, consistently for me, is that I keep on having these awakenings. and they affect how my common day affairs, you know? I mean, not to outdo it, but my Fitbit gives me free 5 or 6, 7 different meditations I can use for different aspects at different times in the day, from sitting at my office to whatever, and they're breathing and they're different things like that. And they're just a tool that I never meditated. Yes, we knew meditate on scripture, you read a scripture, you sit there and you sort of, and that's a good thing. And I'm not saying, but actually slowing down my heart rate and actually breathing and calming down it all came because a gentleman shared that with me when I started, and it wasn't with a Fitbit, but he shared that when I started leading groups at the place I'm at now in recovery for other people that were benefiting by those shares. So maybe it's a little bit too simple today, but I just wanted to make those kind of comments about how much it is a blessing and how I think there's something in it for me, because I think some people have a hard time with the fact that, you know, everything's about diversity now. I'm like, no, this is great. We can love our neighbors. They don't have to be. I think the big thing that blessed me about this, sort of reflecting around that and the joy, is that especially if you grew up thinking that, you know, there was good people and bad people and people that were right and people were wrong, and that was a focus of your life, it becomes really difficult to become as merciful as I believe those spiritual awakenings want us to be. And so that's kind of like why this us and them thing. The sooner we can look upon the world and look upon each other and look upon and be willing to just learn from everybody and just be responsible to be merciful and gracious and accepting. Wow, that's how this recovery life becomes more and more joyful. And the difficulties are the difficulties, you know, they're going to follow us along our life, and we're going to have times when we're back. And like, I'm so thankful about, you know, knowing that 1, 2, 3 steps are always going to be there, and we're continuing and going around and coming to the steps in order. But what a joy it is to think about as you get older, you know, and as you get older, and I mean not with gray hair, but in your recovery, that wow, I can have joy, because one of my favorite passages of scripture is in James chapter 2, verse 13. And the verse just before this says that God does not intend to judge us with, you know, the old law. He intends to judge us with the law of liberty, the law that frees us, not the law that judges us and condemns us. And most of the people I meet, they're already feeling bad about a lot of things that they have no responsibility feeling bad for, but they feel it. And so the more we can do, that was my timer. Is that your timer? Okay, stop. That's mine.
Go ahead and wrap yourself up.
So I'm going to wrap up as soon as I get back out of here. There we go. Good. So in the end, the real verse is mercy triumphs over judgment. Mercy triumphs over judgment. And the sooner and the more and more I live my life that way, I just see in my common day affairs with people, with myself, wow, I'm not so difficult for myself. I'm not so difficult for others. I'm a lot less focused on how things got to be. And that means grace and mercy. That means a lot of freedom. So that's it for me. And I welcome your shares.